Hey everyone, did you know that over 90% of you watching right now haven't hit that subscribe button? If you enjoy our content, take a second to subscribe. It's free and it really helps us keep bringing you great stories every day. It was a quiet Thursday evening when Bob sat alone at the kitchen table staring at the half-empty bottle in front of him. The room was still, save for the ticking clock above the fridge. He had bought a six-pack on the way home, not because he planned to get drunk, but just in case the night turned sour. One drink was enough to take the edge off, maybe two if things got tense. Upstairs, the music that had been playing earlier suddenly stopped. That meant Sharon was finishing up getting ready. She always listened to her playlist before heading out with her friends. These Thursday routines had become something of a rhythm in their marriage. Bob would stay late at work to clear the decks for Friday, and Sharon would go out for drinks with her colleagues. Meanwhile, his parents would pick up their daughter Casey, giving them both a little breathing room. It worked, or at least it used to. Friday mornings were Bob's time with Casey. His parents got to spoil their granddaughter. Sharon got a break from the house, and Bob got a little quiet. On the surface, everything seemed healthy, balanced even. He'd taken pride in how well they'd kept things moving, especially during the chaos of his recent project at work. The hours had been long, but the reward was within reach now. A potential promotion, a big leap for their future. That thought used to bring him comfort. Now it brought a hollow ache. He heard footsteps upstairs, the kind you start to notice when your mind is in overdrive. That sound, just that one small sound, pulled him back to Tuesday. Lunch with Vicky. The sandwiches were great, but that wasn't the part that stuck with him. He could still see her face across the table, the way her expression changed the moment he asked about Sharon. At first, he had assumed she wanted his help planning a surprise party, maybe a gift idea. Sharon's birthday was next month, after all. Instead, she gave him the kind of news you can't unhear. She had sat across from him, hands wrapped tightly around her glass, trying to find the right words. Her voice had been soft but firm. Sharon had been acting differently, she said. Distant. And then, one night after a few too many martinis, she opened up. Said she missed Bob. Said she felt invisible. That their marriage had turned into a schedule rather than a relationship. Vicky wasn't just guessing, she wasn't gossiping. She was trying to help. That much was clear from the emotion behind her words. Bob didn't want to believe it at first. He laughed awkwardly, said it sounded like a bad joke. But Vicky didn't laugh. She didn't flinch. She looked heartbroken delivering the news. And she didn't stop there. She told him about the other women at the table that night, the ones who encouraged Sharon to explore, to find what she needed. And then came the name, Luke Jonas. That name had been circling Bob's mind since the second she said it. He hadn't recognized the name at first, but Vicky described him in a way that stuck. The kind of guy who hunted attention like it was sport. Charming to a fault. A man who thrived on winning over women, especially those who were taken. And Sharon, she had his attention. Vicky said Sharon used to keep her distance. But lately, she wasn't just not backing away. She was leaning in. The worst part was that Vicky wasn't guessing. She'd seen it. Sharon, normally guarded, had started showing up at work lunches with Luke. They sat together, whispered, laughed, touched. When Vicky brought it up, Sharon had defended herself, claimed they were just friends. But the way she blushed, Vicky saw the guilt in her eyes. She called Sharon out, asked her if she'd act that way if Bob were sitting there. That was when Sharon got defensive, throwing out lines about how Bob didn't see her anymore. That hit Bob harder than he expected, because if he was honest, there had been signs. He'd just chosen not to look too closely. Vicky didn't stop there. She told him about the night it crossed a line. The night at the bar when everyone had too much to drink. Sharon had been out of control, more than tipsy, totally lit. And Luke? He didn't back off. He leaned in. He fed her drinks and danced with her. But it wasn't dancing, not the kind Bob had ever seen. It was something else. And then the detail that cut through Bob like a blade. Vicky saw Sharon holding her own underwear in her hand. Not in a bag, not in a pocket. In her hand. And then she put them in Luke's jacket pocket. Bob couldn't move when she told him that, couldn't speak. The way Vicky said it, it wasn't just Sharon acting out. It was Sharon sending a message to her friends, to Luke, maybe even to herself. It felt deliberate. And then there was the kiss. Not a shy, fleeting mistake, but a long, deep, full-on kiss in the middle of the bar. People saw. People filmed it. Sharon didn't pull away. That was the moment Bob realized this wasn't just flirtation. It wasn't just drinks and dancing. It was betrayal. And he hadn't known a thing. He had been home, probably folding laundry or watching TV, maybe answering late-night emails. That same night, Sharon came home after 2 a.m. and climbed into bed like everything was fine. He'd remembered how she kissed him that night, how passionate she was, how different. At the time, it felt like a spark. Now he wondered if it was guilt. Was she trying to cover up what she had done? Or was she just carrying the energy of another man home with her? That thought made Bob's skin crawl. Back at the restaurant, Vicky had watched him closely after she finished talking. She hadn't come to hurt him. She was trying to give him a chance to make a decision before things spiraled further. She said Sharon had cooled things off with Luke recently, but not completely. She still met with him, still talked to him. And when Vicky caught them whispering in the office hallway, they clammed up like teenagers caught skipping class. Bob had thanked her, paid the bill, walked out into the daylight not knowing where to go next. And now, here he was, sitting in the same kitchen with the same routine in motion. Sharon upstairs getting ready, Casey at his parents'. The night unfolding like every Thursday night had for months, except everything felt different now. He heard the floorboards creak again. She was coming down. He took a breath and sat up straighter, trying to keep his face neutral. He had no plan yet, no confrontation in mind. He just needed to see her, watch her, listen closely to everything she said. Sharon rounded the corner with a wide smile and her favorite going-out boots clicking on the tile floor. She wore dark jeans and a soft black blouse. Her makeup was subtle but polished, hair pulled back in a loose knot that framed her cheekbones just right. She looked perfect. And that was the problem. "Hey, babe," she said with a warm smile, grabbing her purse off the counter. "You good?" Bob nodded, giving her a small smile. "Yeah, just tired. Long week." She leaned over and kissed his cheek. "You're always working so hard. I appreciate you, you know?" That made his stomach twist. "I'll be back by midnight," she added, grabbing her keys. "Love you." "Love you too," Bob replied automatically. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Bob stared at it for a long moment. Then he stood up, walked to the sink, and poured the rest of his drink down the drain. He didn't need it. Not anymore. What he needed now was a plan. Bob hadn't told her about the win at work. Not really. He mentioned it, made it sound casual, like no big deal. A supply deal here, a few parts ahead of schedule there. She smiled like she was proud, but didn't ask any follow-up questions. She didn't press for details or even seem that interested, and that silence, that small detail, stuck with him. Sharon used to light up when he succeeded. Now she nodded, poured her wine, and changed the subject. Just like that. He watched her move around the kitchen like everything was normal. Pouring a second glass for him, setting out the plates, laughing at something Casey said from the other room. But Bob wasn't really in the room. Not mentally. He kept thinking about the pocket, the damn underwear in Luke's pocket. His mind went over it again and again, like a car crash on repeat. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the audacity of it, the recklessness, the part of her that thought no one would notice. Or worse, the part that didn't care if they did. Dinner passed in slow motion. Casey talked about school, her new art project, and how Grandpa let her eat 2 cupcakes because it was Thursday and he forgot about the no-sugar rule. Sharon laughed and promised to text her father. Bob pretended to laugh along, his fork scraping his plate now and then to give him something to focus on. He studied Sharon's expressions, her tone, her mannerisms. He was looking for something, guilt, hesitation, discomfort. But she gave him nothing. If she was still sneaking around, she was getting damn good at hiding it. When Casey headed upstairs for her bath, Sharon leaned against the kitchen counter and looked at Bob over her wine glass. "You're quiet tonight," she said, giving him a playful smirk. Big win at work and no victory dance? Bob shrugged. Tired, I guess. It's been a long week. She nodded slowly, then took a sip. Well, I'm proud of you. I really am. You've been killing it lately. The team's lucky to have you. She said it like she meant it, like nothing was wrong. And that calm, cool exterior, he didn't know whether to admire it or be terrified by it. Later, after they'd tucked Casey into bed, Sharon curled up next to him on the couch, scrolling through her phone. Bob watched the screen from the corner of his eye. It was mostly harmless stuff, memes, photos, messages from Hannah. She laughed once at something and turned it toward him. A ridiculous cat video. He smiled. He played along. He even chuckled. But inside he was building a map, a timeline, a plan. At around 10, she stood and stretched, walking toward the stairs. I'm going to take a bath, then probably head to bed early. That cool? Bob nodded, not looking up. Yeah, I might finish up some emails. She paused a second, then leaned over and kissed his cheek. Love you, she said softly. Love you too, he replied. When she was out of sight, he waited a full minute before getting up and heading for the shared desktop in the home office. It was old, slow, and dusty, mostly used for printing school papers and coupons. But sometimes Sharon forgot to log out of her social apps. He clicked into the browser. First, her saved logins. Facebook, nothing. Instagram, same. WhatsApp had a weird logout error, but Messenger was open. He scrolled through her chats. Most of it was boring. PTA threads, co-worker talk, conversations with her sister. He found a short, newer thread from LJ Just Initials. There wasn't much. A few, hey, you around? And can't talk right now, later exchanges. One laughing emoji, one vague message that said, you know I can't say that here. No photos, no timestamps that screamed guilt. But LJ Luke Jonas. It had to be him. Bob stared at the screen. She'd deleted most of it, obviously. He checked the trash folder, the archive, nothing. Whatever had been said, she was making sure it stayed hidden. He stared at her name, her profile picture, that pretty smile he used to love seeing, pop up on his phone. Now it felt like a stranger. He leaned back in the chair, the old frame creaking under his weight. His hands rested on the armrests like he was afraid he might break something if he moved. This wasn't a maybe anymore. She wasn't just slipping. She was hiding. She was protecting something or someone. He stayed in that chair for a while, mind working in overdrive. If she wasn't going out with the girls Thursday and she still went out anyway, where would she go? Would she lie? Would she tell him it was a last-minute get-together? Would she come up with a new excuse? Bob had always trusted her when she said she needed space. Now, he realized, that same trust gave her the freedom to step outside the lines. The next morning, Bob dropped Casey off at school himself. Sharon had a work breakfast, or so she said. She kissed Casey on the forehead, kissed Bob lightly on the lips, and rushed out the door in heels and lipstick. A little extra glam for a Thursday. As he watched her drive off, Bob's jaw tightened. She was too careful now, too smooth. If she was still meeting Luke, it wouldn't be obvious. She wouldn't use the same locations. She wasn't stupid. But she was still arrogant enough to think he didn't notice. And that was the part he'd use to his advantage. At lunch, Bob called Ron. It was awkward at first. Vicky had already given him a heads up, so the conversation started quiet. Polite. But within minutes, they were speaking like two men who knew what betrayal looked like. Ron didn't ask unnecessary questions. He offered what he could, tips on reading behavior, resources for couples therapy, and something Bob hadn't expected, a phone number for a private investigator. I hope you don't need it, Ron had said. But if you want answers, this guy gets them. Clean, no drama, no confrontations. Bob took the number and promised to think about it. He didn't say whether he'd use it. He hadn't decided yet. By Thursday morning, he had decided on something else. He was going to follow her. No cameras, no third parties, no legal mess. Just him and the truth. Sharon left the house just after 6:45 p.m., dressed in skinny jeans, a dark blouse, and ankle boots. She wore a leather jacket she hadn't touched in months. It looked good on her. Too good. She blew him a kiss as she walked out the door. "Love you," she called. He waved. "Love you too. Be safe." As soon as her taillights vanished down the street, Bob grabbed his keys and slipped into his own car. He'd parked it up the block earlier so she wouldn't hear the engine or see him get in. He felt ridiculous doing it, like he was some teenager sneaking out. But this wasn't a game. This was his life, his marriage. He followed at a distance, not too close, not too far. She drove past the usual route to Red Horse and turned left, away from the bar, away from downtown. She drove with purpose, not hesitating at intersections, not circling like someone stalling. That's what hit Bob hardest. She wasn't unsure. She knew where she was going. She'd done it before. She pulled into a parking lot near a strip of restaurants and boutique shops. Bob parked across the street and waited. She got out of the car, checked her phone, then walked straight into a narrow wine bistro. Classy place. Low lights. No loud music. Definitely not where a bunch of girlfriends would hang out. 10 minutes passed. Then Bob saw him. Luke. Tall, lean, arrogant posture like he thought he owned the air around him. He pulled up in a dark car, checked his reflection in the mirror, then stepped out and walked in like he belonged there. Like he'd done it before. Bob didn't move. He didn't storm in. He didn't even shake. He just sat there, numb, watching, confirming what he already knew. They were careful. No hand-holding, no dramatic kisses on arrival. Just two people meeting up for wine. But their bodies leaned toward each other. Their heads tilted closer when they laughed. When the waiter brought out a small plate of something, Sharon cut a piece and offered it to him. He took it, smiling. Bob looked away. He sat in silence in darkness, the only light from the dash clock ticking forward minute by minute. He didn't know what hurt more, that she was with someone else, or that she looked happy. When Sharon came home 2 hours later, Bob was in the living room, pretending to scroll through his phone. She stepped in, cheeks flushed, the faintest scent of expensive wine clinging to her breath. "Girls' night was chill," she said, kicking off her boots. "Mostly just caught up on stuff. Everyone's kind of worn out this week." Bob nodded, not looking up. "Cool, glad you had fun." She leaned down, kissed his head, and headed upstairs. Bob sat there long after she disappeared, staring at nothing. He wasn't going to confront her, not yet. But the next move was his. He didn't sleep that night. The soft rhythm of Sharon's breathing beside him, the faint creak of the ceiling fan, even the warmth of their shared blanket. It all felt like a mockery of the truth. His wife, the woman lying inches away, was slipping into dreams after spending her evening in another man's company. And here he was, eyes open in the dark, cataloging every word, every glance, every betrayal she thought she'd hidden. She stirred once in her sleep, mumbling something and turning toward him. Her hand grazed his arm, and instinctively his body reacted. Years of routine intimacy took over. He didn't flinch, didn't move away, but his heart had already taken several steps back. He was no longer beside her, not really. There was distance now, and she didn't even know it. In the morning, he made coffee just like always. Casey came down the stairs dragging her favorite blanket, asking if there were any chocolate chip muffins left. Sharon walked in minutes later, freshly showered, humming to herself like the night before, had been exactly what she said, a harmless girls' night. Bob played along, he smiled. He packed Casey's lunch. He kissed Sharon on the cheek before she left for work, and once the door closed behind her, his smile vanished. He knew something now, something she didn't think he'd ever realize. She was too comfortable lying to him, not nervous, not shaken. She believed she had everything under control. That gave him an edge. She wouldn't see him coming. That weekend, he took Casey to visit his sister in the next town. They painted pumpkins, played board games, and ate too many cookies. Sharon stayed behind, citing a work project she needed to finish. Bob hadn't even asked her to come. He was curious to see what she'd do with the space. She texted him once Saturday evening. "Hope Casey's having a blast." "Miss you both. No photo, no call. Just enough effort to maintain the illusion." Sunday afternoon, Bob drove back and checked their security system. He'd installed a new monitoring app months ago when there was a string of car break-ins in the neighborhood. Sharon didn't care about it. She hardly even remembered the cameras were there. He scanned the footage. No visitors, no odd activity. But the living room lights had been on past midnight, and her car had been gone for over an hour in the middle of the night. He checked her messages again, what little of them she hadn't wiped clean. There was nothing. She was being smarter. She'd learned how to cover her tracks. But people make mistakes. They always do. All it takes is one. And Bob was very patient. By Monday morning, Bob was ready. He didn't confront her. He didn't throw accusations or demand explanations. He played the long game. Instead of exposing her, he started collecting her habits, her movements, her changes in tone. He noted when she wore perfume, when she suddenly needed space, when her phone was flipped screen down. He started responding differently too. Less curious, less available. Sometimes he'd come home late, claiming he stopped off for a drink with an old friend from work. Sometimes he'd leave his phone face down on the table, just like she did, mimicking her tactics, subtly mirroring her distance, seeing if she'd notice. She didn't. She started to believe he'd pulled away emotionally. That gave her permission to drift further. Bob, meanwhile, was doing the opposite. He was sharpening. He hired the private investigator Ron had suggested, discreetly under a different name, with a prepaid number. The guy didn't ask many questions, just what Bob wanted to know. Where she went, who she saw, and when. By the second week, the investigator delivered the first real confirmation. Sharon and Luke had met twice. Once at the same bistro Bob had seen them at, and once at a different restaurant on the other side of town. They always sat in the back, never lingered too long, always separate cars. They were cautious, but not cautious enough. On the third meeting, they'd left together. Luke's car. The PI didn't take photos inside the car. He wasn't reckless, but the implication was clear. Bob didn't need a photo to know what that meant. Still, he said nothing. He came home, made dinner, helped Casey with her homework. He made love to Sharon the night after he received the report. Not out of affection, not out of passion, but out of calculation. Her body responded to his like always, her breath soft in his ear. She was pretending too. She thought she was being careful. She thought she could keep the lie going. But Bob had already stopped playing her game. He was building his own. He didn't want to divorce her in anger. He didn't want a messy custody battle or a drawn-out courtroom drama. He wanted control, clarity. He wanted to exit on his terms. And if he did it right, she'd never even see it coming. He started gathering the documents. He reviewed their shared assets, checked the savings accounts, confirmed the equity on the house. Everything was split evenly. Or so Sharon believed. But she hadn't noticed the new account he'd opened months back. One she wasn't listed on. He'd moved small amounts of money over time. Legal, quiet, invisible. He met with a lawyer. Not one from the city. Someone 2 towns over. A specialist in clean strategic separations. The woman was sharp, professional, and, most importantly, discreet. Bob laid out the situation. He didn't embellish, just the facts. The lawyer leaned back in her chair and asked one question. Do you want to confront her before or after she's served? Bob thought for a moment. After, he said. I want her to feel what I felt. Confused, blindsided, lost. The lawyer nodded. We'll need a little more proof. Not for court necessarily, but for leverage. Bob smiled faintly. I'll get it. And he did. The next time Sharon met Luke, Bob had someone tail both of them. Photos were taken. Grainy but undeniable. One of them holding hands near the car, another of them kissing in a dim parking lot. It wasn't tabloid material, but it was enough to break the illusion. Bob waited one more week. During that time, he acted like nothing had changed. He cooked dinner, laughed at Casey's jokes, even massaged Sharon's shoulders one night after she came home, exhausted from work. She leaned into him, grateful, guilt-free. Then Friday came. He left for work early, kissed them both goodbye like usual, and drove out to meet the lawyer again. The final papers were ready. The serving was scheduled for Monday morning. He hadn't planned to say anything that weekend. He was going to let the silence stretch, let Sharon enjoy her final days of the lie. But something changed Saturday night. They were all on the couch watching an old Disney movie. Casey had fallen asleep in the crook of his arm. Sharon was curled against his side. She looked up at him at one point and whispered, "We're lucky, you know? Not everyone has this." And Bob looked down at her, at this woman who'd said that with no irony, no shame. She genuinely believed she could hold both lives in her hands and never get caught. He didn't respond. He just looked at her. A quiet, steady stare that made her blink and shift. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm good," he said softly. "Just thinking about how fast things change." That was all he said, and he watched her brow crease ever so slightly before she smiled again and kissed his cheek. Monday morning arrived like any other, except this time she wasn't just opening the door to get the mail. She was opening the door to the truth. And Bob was ready. Bob stood in the driveway for a long time after the process server's car pulled away. The yellow envelope sat heavy in his hand, even though he wasn't the one receiving it. Inside that envelope was everything: the truth, the proof, and the quiet end to a marriage that once felt unshakable. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the branches of the maple tree near the sidewalk. It was the kind of day where nothing looked wrong from the outside. The house was still standing, the lawn was still trimmed. The neighborhood buzzed with the distant sound of someone mowing and a kid's laughter down the block. It could have been any day, except it wasn't. It was the day Bob had drawn the line. He finally turned the knob and stepped back inside. Sharon was sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone, one leg tucked under the other. She looked up when she heard the door and smiled like nothing had changed. "Hey," she said. "You forgot your wallet this morning. I left it on the kitchen counter." Bob didn't answer right away. He set the envelope on the coffee table in front of her and stepped back. Sharon looked at it, confused. "What's this?" "You should open it." There was something calm in his voice that didn't match the tension in the air. She picked up the envelope slowly, her eyes scanning his face like she was trying to read between the lines before reading the actual page. When she finally slid the documents out and began reading, her posture stiffened. It didn't take long before her hands began to shake. This is divorce paperwork?" she whispered. Bob nodded once. "You're divorcing me?" Her voice cracked, rising with disbelief. "After everything we've built? You're just quitting?" "I'm not quitting," Bob said. "I'm acknowledging the truth. You stepped away a long time ago. I'm just catching up." "No, wait, Bob, please." She reached for his arm, but he stepped back. "I'm not doing this to punish you, Sharon," he said, voice still calm. "I'm doing it to protect what's left of me. You made choices. I ignored them at first. I thought maybe we could fix it. But after everything Vicky told me, after what I saw myself..." He shook his head. "This isn't a misunderstanding. It's a pattern. A decision you kept making over and over again." Her eyes filled with tears. "I was lonely, Bob. You were always working. I felt invisible. I just wanted to feel something again." "You could have talked to me," he said, steady but firm. "You could have told me how you felt. I would have listened. I would have done everything I could to bring us back. But instead, you turned to someone else. And that night..." He stopped himself, jaw tightening. "You don't just come back from that." "I didn't mean to fall for him," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't supposed to get that far." Bob didn't respond right away. He walked over to the kitchen, grabbed his wallet from the counter, and slipped it into his pocket. "What happens now?" she asked. "You'll get everything in writing," he said. "The house goes up for sale. We'll split the proceeds. Casey stays here for now with me. You'll have time with her, of course. I'll never keep her from you. But I want full legal custody. I'm not negotiating on that." Sharon's face twisted. "You think I'm a bad mother?" "No," Bob said softly. "I think you've been lost. And while you've been figuring things out, I've been raising our daughter. She needs consistency. She needs to be protected from whatever chaos you're still sorting through. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing it to protect her." Sharon didn't speak. She just stared at the envelope on the table, as if maybe if she stared long enough, it would vanish. But it didn't. It just sat there, like a verdict. Later that evening, Sharon packed a small bag and left quietly. She didn't fight, didn't scream. Maybe she was too stunned. Maybe she knew deep down it was coming. Bob watched from the window as she pulled out of the driveway and turned the corner. The silence that followed was deafening, but also strangely peaceful. That night, Bob made mac and cheese with hot dogs for Casey, her favorite. They sat at the table together and she chattered about school, her voice light and full of curiosity. She didn't ask where Mommy was. Maybe she was too young to grasp what was happening. Or maybe she just sensed that her father had stepped in more fully, anchoring the ship while the storm raged on. After dinner, they built a pillow fort in the living room. Bob let her stay up a little later than usual, and when she finally drifted off, he just sat there in the dim glow of the TV, listening to her breathe. The ache in his chest was still there, but it didn't own him anymore. It was just something to carry, not something that defined him. The next few weeks passed quietly. Sharon moved in with her sister temporarily. Bob's lawyer handled most of the communication. They exchanged polite emails about visitation schedules and financial disclosures, but nothing more. Sharon never contested the custody arrangement. Bob suspected she knew she wouldn't win that fight. Luke faded from the picture pretty quickly. Rumor had it he'd tried to keep things going, but Sharon wasn't interested anymore. Maybe reality had finally sobered her? Or maybe she'd realized that what she thought was freedom was just another kind of trap. In any case, Bob didn't care. That part of the story was over. Vicky checked in occasionally, sometimes with a text, sometimes with a coffee drop-off at his office. Her presence stayed light, respectful, never pushing. Bob appreciated that more than she probably knew. She had her own life, her own marriage, but she made it clear that if he ever needed to talk, she was there. It took time, but eventually the weight began to lift. The house felt different without Sharon in it, but it didn't feel empty. It felt honest. And that was something Bob hadn't realized he'd been missing. There were no more lies, no more guessing, just him and Casey, figuring it out day by day. One Saturday, a few months after the papers were finalized, Bob took Casey to a park on the edge of town. It was one of those perfect spring afternoons. Cool breeze, sunshine, kids running wild. He sat on a bench with a cup of coffee while Casey ran to the swings. As she laughed, pumping her legs higher and higher into the sky, Bob felt something shift inside him. Not closure exactly. That word always felt too clean for something like this. But there was peace, a knowing that he'd survived something that could have broken him. And he hadn't just survived, he'd grown stronger. A woman sat down on the bench beside him. She had kind eyes, a warm smile, and a little boy chasing a soccer ball nearby. They exchanged a quick nod and a shared glance toward their kids. She commented on the weather. He agreed. Nothing heavy, just a simple, pleasant exchange between two strangers on a sunny afternoon. And in that moment, Bob realized that life wasn't over. It was different, unpredictable, but still full of possibility. That night, back at home, he tucked Casey in and kissed her forehead. She curled into her blanket and mumbled something sleepy about unicorns and chocolate milk. He smiled and turned off the light. In the quiet that followed, Bob sat on the edge of his bed, staring out the window at the moon. He thought about everything, the betrayal, the pain, the anger, the calm strategy he'd executed when it would have been so much easier to rage. He'd chosen peace, not weakness, truth, not denial. And in doing so, he'd reclaimed himself. This wasn't the life he'd imagined when he said, "I do," but it was the life he had now. And finally, it felt like his again. Not something borrowed, not something betrayed. Just his. And that, in the end, was enough.